War usually celebrates those who stand their ground. History books praise the last stand, the final bullet, the heroic sacrifice. But hidden behind the propaganda of World War II was a quiet contradiction. While speeches demanded that soldiers never retreat, German engineers were secretly designing something radical. A war machine built not to hold the line, but to escape it. A vehicle where survival mattered more than glory. A machine that could look the enemy in the face and then vanish at full speed without ever turning around. This was not a tank. It was not meant to conquer territory. It was meant to see everything and live. And that philosophy would give birth to one of the strangest and most advanced armored vehicles of the entire war. A machine so complex it overwhelmed its own creators. So advanced it arrived years too late. And so rare that today, not a single original example survives. This is the story of the Puma. The armored car that treated retreat not as failure, but as strategy. To understand why this machine existed at all, we need to return to a moment when Germany still believed it could engineer its way out of any problem. The year was 1940. The Blitzkrieg had stunned Europe. Poland had collapsed. France had fallen in weeks. German columns raced across roads faster than anyone thought possible. But beneath the surface of those victories, something was already going wrong. German reconnaissance units were supposed to be the eyes of the army. Fast armored cars would scout ahead, spot enemy positions, and guide tanks and infantry forward. On paper, it worked perfectly. In reality, it was a nightmare. The main reconnaissance vehicles of the time were heavy 8-wheeled armored cars adapted from civilian truck designs. They were overworked, underpowered, and dangerously fragile. Their gasoline engines overheated after long drives. Suspensions cracked on rough roads. Mechanical failures happened at the worst possible moments. And their main weapons, small automatic cannons, were nearly useless against real armored opposition. Crews would spot enemy units, report them, and then try to pull back. Too often, they never made it. The scouts were becoming targets instead of observers. Then the war expanded south. North Africa opened a new battlefield unlike anything Europe had seen. Endless desert. Extreme heat. Vast distances. Vehicles might operate hundreds of kilometers from the nearest workshop. Radiators boiled dry. Engines failed. Tires shredded. In the desert, a breakdown could be a death sentence. The German command realized that nothing they had was suitable for this environment. They needed a new kind of reconnaissance vehicle. One that could drive deep into enemy territory, survive brutal conditions, and return without support. In August 1940, an ambitious order was placed. A heavy reconnaissance armored car designed specifically for extreme climates. Several companies were pulled into the project. Chassis development went to experienced manufacturers. Armor production was distributed across factories. But the most critical challenge was the engine. It had to survive heat, cold, dust, and long distances without complex cooling systems. The solution would come from an unexpected place. In Czechoslovakia, at the Tatra factory, Chief Engineer Hans Ledwinka received what many considered an impossible task. He was asked to design a powerful diesel engine that required no water cooling at all. No radiator. No coolant. Nothing that could freeze in winter or boil in summer. Just air. For nearly 2 years, Ledwinka and his team experimented relentlessly. Failures piled up. Noise levels were unacceptable. Vibrations shook prototypes apart. But by 1942, they achieved something extraordinary. A 12-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine producing over 200 horsepower. It ran without water. It consumed fuel efficiently. And it could operate in extreme conditions where other engines failed. But it had one fatal flaw. It was too loud. For a reconnaissance vehicle, noise was deadly. If the enemy heard you coming, your mission was already over. Engineers worked desperately to quiet the engine, adding refinements and redesigns. Time, however, was running out. By late 1942, The war in North Africa had turned against Germany. The desert battlefield that inspired the entire project was slipping away. In 1943, Axis forces surrendered in Tunisia. The original purpose of the vehicle vanished before it ever entered service. At this point, the project should have been cancelled. Germany was under pressure on every front. Resources were scarce. But instead of abandoning it, the designers adapted. The vast open spaces of the Eastern Front still demanded long-range reconnaissance. A vehicle capable of traveling immense distances without refueling still had value. One major piece was missing: a turret with serious firepower. Production priorities were stretched thin, but fate intervened. A separate light tank project was cancelled in early 1943. The tank never reached completion, but its turrets had already been built. Fully assembled. Armed with a powerful 50mm cannon normally found on medium tanks. Engineers made a bold decision. They mounted this heavy turret onto the new armored car chassis. On paper, it made no sense. A turret designed for a much heavier vehicle was now sitting on a relatively light-wheeled platform. But when the first prototype rolled out, it became clear that something special had been created. At the same time, the engine problem was finally solved. The air-cooled diesel was quiet enough for reconnaissance use. It was reliable. It was fuel-efficient. And it eliminated an entire category of mechanical failure. There was nothing to freeze. Nothing to boil over. Yet the most revolutionary feature was not the engine or the gun. It was the way the vehicle moved. Instead of one driver, it had two. One in the front. One in the rear. Both had full controls. The transmission allowed equal speeds forward and backward. All 8 wheels could steer. This meant the vehicle could disengage instantly, reversing at full speed while keeping its strongest armor facing the enemy. This was not a machine designed to fight. It was designed to survive. Everything about it reflected that philosophy. Speed over armor. Awareness over brute force. Escape over confrontation. But perfection demanded sacrifice, and the sacrifices were severe. Armor thickness was kept minimal to save weight. The front offered reasonable protection, but the sides were dangerously thin. Heavy machine gun fire could penetrate them. Production was nightmarishly complex. Parts came from multiple factories spread across occupied Europe. Logistics became a constant struggle. And perhaps most dangerously, the vehicle tempted its own crews. With a gun powerful enough to destroy enemy armored cars and light tanks, crews sometimes forgot their mission. They were scouts, not fighters. But when you could see the enemy clearly through your sights, restraint was hard. The Puma had become a masterpiece of engineering and a contradiction of doctrine. It was ready at last. But the war it was designed for no longer existed. And when it finally entered combat, it would face an enemy it was never meant to outrun. The sky. By the summer of 1944, the Puma finally reached the battlefield in meaningful numbers. Not the desert it was designed for. Not the endless plains of North Africa. Instead, it entered one of the most dangerous environments imaginable for a lightly armored vehicle. Normandy. The Allied landings shattered the German front in Western Europe. Roads were crowded with retreating units, civilians, broken equipment, and constant movement. In this chaos, information was more valuable than firepower. Knowing where the enemy was mattered more than how many shells you carried. This was the Puma's moment. Veteran reconnaissance crews took the lead. Their task was simple and deadly. Slip between enemy positions. Observe. Report. Disappear. They moved cautiously, hiding during daylight and advancing at night. Fields, hedgerows, narrow roads. Every shadow could hide danger. Every turn could expose them. Inside each Puma, 4 men worked in tense silence. The commander scanned the horizon through binoculars. The gunner watched the sights, knowing restraint was survival. The front driver focused on every sound from the engine. And behind him, facing backward, the second driver waited. hands on the controls, ready to pull them out in seconds. When contact happened, the Puma shocked its opponents. Allied troops expected light German scout cars with small cannons. Instead, they faced a vehicle carrying a gun capable of disabling armored cars and light tanks. Short engagements ended quickly. Then the Puma vanished, reversing away at full speed, armor facing the threat. Against ground forces, the concept worked. But the battlefield had changed. The real enemy was no longer only on the road or behind the hedgerow. It was above. By mid-1944, the Allies controlled the sky completely. Fighter bombers hunted relentlessly. Roads became death traps. Any movement during daylight risked immediate detection. Dust trails, shadows, reflections. Nothing escaped trained pilots scanning from altitude. For heavy tanks, air attacks were dangerous but survivable. Thick armor absorbed fragments. For the Puma, thin steel offered no forgiveness. Aircraft cannons and rockets tore through it effortlessly. Speed meant nothing when escape routes were blocked by wreckage. Maneuverability was useless when there was nowhere to hide. The very qualities that made the Puma exceptional now betrayed it. In August 1944, German forces were trapped in a collapsing pocket. Roads clogged with burning vehicles. Smoke darkened the sky. Air attacks came in relentless waves. Puma crews fought to survive, not to win. Some escaped through narrow gaps. Many did not. When the fighting ended, the numbers told a brutal story. Tank units suffered catastrophic losses. Yet proportionally, reconnaissance units survived slightly better. Not because of armor but because of tactics. Observation. Avoidance. Withdrawal. The Puma had proven its philosophy correct, even as it was being destroyed by forces beyond its design. Production ended quietly in late 1944. The German economy was collapsing. Complex vehicles assembled across multiple factories were a luxury no longer possible. The Puma was replaced by simpler, cheaper models. Less capable. Easier to build. Disposable. The surviving Pumas continued fighting into the final months of the war. Eastern Europe. Retreats through ruined cities. Covering evacuations. Some reached Germany itself. And then they disappeared. Not a single original Puma survives today. All 101 vehicles built were destroyed, dismantled, or lost in the chaos of defeat. Museums display related variants, simplified versions that followed. But the true Puma exists only in photographs, reports, and memories. A ghost machine. Yet its ideas did not die. Allied engineers studied captured examples closely. They were impressed. 2 driver stations. Equal forward and reverse speed. 8-wheel steering. Long-range endurance. These concepts were decades ahead of their time. 30 years later, a new generation of reconnaissance vehicles emerged. 8-wheeled platforms returned. Dual control layouts reappeared. High mobility replaced heavy armor as the priority. The Puma's philosophy lived on quietly, reborn in modern designs across the world. The machine itself never changed the outcome of the war. 100 vehicles could not stop armies. They could not challenge air superiority. They could not rewrite history. But they changed how reconnaissance was understood. The Puma taught a lesson that modern warfare still follows. Survival is not about standing your ground. It is about knowing when to leave. Protection does not come only from steel, but from awareness, speed, and discipline. Its crews understood this better than anyone. They trusted their vehicle not because it could win fights, but because it could end them before they began. They saw first. They moved first. And when danger closed in, they did not hesitate. They reversed into survival. The Puma was too advanced, too complex, too late, and yet, it was one of the most forward-thinking machines of its era. A reconnaissance vehicle built on a truth that war propaganda never admits. Sometimes the bravest decision is not to stay. Sometimes the smartest weapon is the ability to disappear.